Welcome back to Klepper's Corner, Today in History, the show where we sift through the calendar and discover that somehow humanity keeps making the same mistakes, but with increasingly expensive equipment. Today is December 28th, a date that has seen innovation, catastrophe, political awakening, heroic stubbornness, and at least one engineering failure so avoidable that even a toddler with Lincoln Logs would have said, "Buddy, no." So let's dive in before history collapses under us like, well, you'll see in segment 3. Segment 1, the birth of cinema, Lumiere brothers, 1895. December 28th, 1895, the day movies were born. A day when a small basement room in Paris became ground zero for humanity's greatest storytelling medium, and later, Marvel's Phase 4. The Lumiere brothers set up their cinematograph, charged a franc, and projected 10 short films to an audience who had no idea they were witnessing the start of global pop culture. Imagine being in that room. No popcorn, no previews, no guy behind you loudly explaining the plot to his date. Just 40 Parisians staring at a projected image of factory workers leaving a building. And they loved it. People were so amazed they reportedly staggered out, rubbing their eyes like they just discovered Netflix's "Are You Still Watching" screen for the first time. And the best part? The Lumieres thought cinema had no future. They basically invented the medium that would eventually give us Star Wars, Dune, Citizen Kane, Barbenheimer, and still said, probably a fad. Meanwhile, Thomas Edison was somewhere clutching his kinetoscope like a guy insisting vinyl is better while everyone else is streaming Spotify. The Lumiere brothers democratized the experience, brought people together, and accidentally laid the groundwork for a century of Hollywood, sequels, reboots, and that one guy who claps when the plane lands. What started as 10 50-second films in a Paris cafe became the global ritual of sitting in the dark with strangers while a giant screen asks, emotionally, do you have 2 hours and 37 minutes to spare? Segment 2, the Messina earthquake, Europe's deadliest quake, 1908. Now we jump from cinematic magic to catastrophic reality. The 1908 Messina earthquake, Europe's deadliest. At 5:20 a.m., the ground shook so violently that entire cities basically folded like poorly assembled IKEA furniture. Messina and Reggio Calabria were flattened, a tsunami followed, and tens of thousands of people died in minutes. This wasn't just an earthquake. This was the tectonic equivalent of the universe saying, "Your city? Yes, about that. No." And yet, from the rubble rose one of the earliest large-scale international humanitarian responses. The Russian Navy arrived first, uninvited, unprompted, and absolutely heroic. They dug survivors out of debris while aftershocks tried to drop-kick them back into the Mediterranean. These men became known as the Angels from the Sea, proving that sometimes history throws a plot twist so oddly wholesome you can't help but root for it. Then the British showed up with medical teams, and the U.S. diverted ships from the Great White Fleet. And suddenly, the disaster zone looked less like southern Italy and more like the world's saddest G7 meeting. Nations that would later argue about literally everything somehow aligned for one shining moment to say, okay, this we help with. And the quake didn't just reshape coastlines, it altered migration. Thousands fled to America, which responded the way America always does. Welcome, here's Ellis Island. Hope you like paperwork. It's a hard story, but it's also a reminder that even in moments when the Earth decides to speedrun chaos mode, humanity is capable of showing up for each other, even without a UN meeting, a hashtag, or an overproduced celebrity PSA. Segment 3, the Tay Bridge disaster. When engineering said, oops, 1879. December 28th also gave us one of the most preventable engineering disasters in British history, the collapse of the Tay Bridge. This thing had been open for barely a year before a storm came through and said, let's test this bad boy. And the bridge responded with, please don't. A train was crossing during gale force winds when the entire high girder section collapsed straight into the Firth of Tay. No survivors. And the later investigation basically concluded this bridge was badly designed, badly built, and badly maintained, which is structural engineer speak for you had one job. Turns out Sir Thomas Booch, the guy behind the bridge, hadn't really calculated for wind, which is an interesting omission, considering the bridge was built over an enormous body of water in Scotland, a region with meteorological moods that can be summarized as hold on to something. The cast iron columns were brittle, the bolts were sketchy, and repairs often consisted of hammering random bits of metal into loose joints, the Victorian version of duct tape. And when the wind picked up, the bridge did what I do during tax season, collapse under pressure. The disaster was so traumatic that the next major bridge, the fourth bridge, was built with enough over-engineering to survive the apocalypse. Engineers looked at the Tay Bridge and said, never again. Then built something that looks like it could bench press a battleship. So yes, December 28th gave us the moment when Britain collectively learned that bridges should not behave like Jenga towers in a hurricane. Segment 4, founding of the Indian National Congress, the birth of modern India, 1885. On December 28, 1885, a meeting of just 72 delegates in Bombay quietly set the stage for one of the most consequential political movements in world history, the founding of the Indian National Congress. Picture it. Lawyers, educators, journalists, basically the Avengers of 19th century bureaucracy, gathering at Gokuldas Tejpal College to politely begin dismantling the British Empire. And it all starts because one retired British civil servant, Alan Octavian Hume, decided Indians deserved political representation instead of whatever the Raj thought they were doing. In that first meeting, nobody was demanding independence yet. No one was storming anything. The resolutions were modest. Maybe we could have a say in legislation? Could Indians take the civil service exam without needing a ship ticket to London? Perhaps we don't need to bankrupt the subcontinent for every imperial passion project. These were not radical asks. These were basic customer service complaints. But from those humble beginnings emerged the political engine that would produce giants: Tilak, Nauroji, Gandhi, Nehru, and eventually steer India toward independence. The December 28th session is like the pilot episode of a show that starts slow but becomes the highest-rated series of the 20th century. It's wild to think that one afternoon meeting spawned a movement that eventually evicted the world's largest empire using nonviolence, mass mobilization, and the sheer organizational power of people who can debate for 12 straight hours without blinking. December 28th didn't just produce a political party. It planted the seed for the world's largest democracy. And yes, it all started because 72 people dared to ask the British Empire, hey, quick question. Segment 5, Calhoun resigns. The nullification crisis escalates. 1832. Now we hop across the Atlantic to the United States, where December 28, 1832 delivered the political equivalent of a relationship breakup text. Vice President John C. Calhoun resigned. The only VP in history to voluntarily quit. And no, it wasn't because he wanted to spend more time with family. He wanted to fight his own president. See, South Carolina hated the Tariff of 1828 so much they called it the Tariff of Abominations. That's how you know they were mad. They gave the tax a name that sounds like a metal band's first album. Calhoun championed nullification, the idea that a state could just say, yeah, that federal law, not doing it. President Andrew Jackson responded basically like, try it, and I will personally deliver the U.S. Army to your doorstep. So Calhoun, deciding he could yell louder as a senator than as VP, resigned. Imagine quitting the vice presidency because you wanted more drama. That's like leaving your job as COO to become chief guy who argues with the CEO on Twitter. His resignation accelerated the states' rights movement, laying groundwork for the Civil War. Really, it was America's first major, we need to talk about the Union moment, a preview of the breakup fight to come. Calhoun walked so future constitutional crises could run. The man pioneered political obstruction the way early YouTubers pioneered shaky vertical video. poorly, but historically. Segment 6, the Endangered Species Act, when Nixon accidentally saved everything. 1973, December 28, 1973. Richard Nixon signs the Endangered Species Act, which is still the most powerful environmental law in the country. Yes, the guy whose legacy includes resignation, tapes, and so many crimes he needed a bingo card also saved the bald eagle, the gray wolf, the alligator, and every animal that has ever appeared in a PBS documentary where an anxious British narrator whispers, "But time is running out." Congress passed it almost unanimously, which means Democrats and Republicans looked at each other and said, "Hey, maybe letting species go extinct is bad." Do you know how rare bipartisanship is? Congress can't even agree on lunch, but in 1973, they united like a Disney finale to protect plants, animals, and the ecosystems that keep the country from turning into a Costco parking lot. The act said you can't harm endangered species, can't destroy their habitat, and federal agencies have to make sure their actions don't doom the animals further. It was like giving wildlife a lawyer, a bodyguard, and a very stern HR representative. Sure, later decades would bring controversies. The spotted owl, the snail darter, every rancher who's ever looked at a wolf and said, "That thing's going to ruin my week." But the ESA still stands as a rare moment when America collectively pointed at nature and said, "You know what? Let's keep some of this." It's poetic that Nixon, a man known for wiretapping, passed the law that helped protect creatures who just want to be left alone. Segment 7, the Battle of Ortona. Little Stalingrad in Italy, 1943. December 28th closes out one of the most brutal urban battles of World War II, the Battle of Ortona. This was Canada's introduction to the worst real estate bidding war in history, one where every house came with charming exposed brick because it had been blown open by artillery. The Germans fortified the town like they were prepping it for the world's angriest Airbnb guest. Booby traps, snipers everywhere, streets turned into choke points, entire buildings designed to collapse on anyone unlucky enough to walk through the front door. It wasn't a town, it was a 3D puzzle designed by someone who hated puzzles. So the Canadians invented mouse holing, which sounds adorable but was actually blowing holes through the walls of adjacent buildings and fighting from room to avoid stepping outside. It's the closest war has ever come to a home renovation show. Today on Fixer Upper, Trench Edition, we'll be knocking out this load-bearing wall with explosives and hoping for the best. After 8 days of hellish fighting, the Germans withdrew. The Canadians took the town, proved their grit, and unfortunately also proved that urban warfare is the worst group project imaginable. Ortona shows how much courage it takes for soldiers to fight through a city where danger is literally baked into the architecture. And it shows that even small battles can define national identity, especially if your national identity includes politely apologizing before shoulder charging through a wall with TNT. Segment 8, Birthdays. Wilson, Stan Lee, Von Neumann, because December 28th likes icons. And now, as always, we end with birthdays. The cosmic reminder that for every disaster, political meltdown, or engineering faceplant, the universe throws in a few humans who completely reshape the world. December 28th is stacked like it's trying to build the ultimate crossover episode. Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States, father of the Federal Reserve, signer of the income tax, World War I architect, League of Nations dreamer. He tried to redesign the entire global order and then forgot to tell the U.S. Senate, who responded with, "Cute idea, no." Wilson's legacy is complicated, brilliant, flawed, visionary, and the reason every political science major thinks they're destined to save the world until they meet the DMV. Stan Lee, the man who basically said, what if superheroes had feelings? He co-created Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Hulk, Black Panther, and more. Then cameoed in so many films, he became the Where's Waldo of the Marvel Universe. His characters reshaped pop culture, taught generations that power comes with responsibility, and made billions in box office revenue, which he saw approximately none of. Thanks to Stan Lee, entire generations believe radiation gives you cool powers instead of a quick trip to the ER. John von Neumann, a mind so powerful that if he were alive today, he'd probably solve quantum computing during a coffee break. He shaped game theory, modern computing architecture, nuclear strategy, and possibly 3 or 4 dimensions we don't even know about yet. He basically invented the logic behind every computer on Earth. So if this episode buffers, freezes, or crashes, blame someone else, because von Neumann did his part. In conclusion, December 28th is a day where humanity shows off the full emotional spectrum. Awe at new technology, heartbreak from natural catastrophe, fury at political upheaval, determination in wartime, and inspiration from people whose birthdays feel less like coincidences and more like the universe stacking the deck. It's a day where invention, destruction, leadership, failure, and genius intersect in ways that make you wonder how history manages to pack so much into 24 hours without charging overtime. And that's Today in History. Tune in next time when another date on the calendar tries to convince us it's even more chaotic. And honestly, it probably will be.